I want to thank you all for being here and for listening. Well, you have no choice about being here. But thank you all for listening to the story. As Kate said, Thursday is Holocaust Remembrance Day. That means Thursday will be the 77th anniversary of the date that my grandmother was liberated from Auschwitz concentration camp. Her husband was not liberated, he died in the camp. But I am grateful that I have that grandmother. She was the only grandparent I had because her husband and my other two grandparents died in the camps, along with two of my grandmother's sons. And for my other grandparents, 3 of their sons. And also my 9-year-old brother and 12-year-old sister that never had a chance to grow up. So I tell this story in honor of their memory and in honor of the memory of the other 6 million Jews that died at that time in those camps. Now, I was invited by the Heritage Museum to work on my mother's Shoah presentation. Most of you are too young. I don't know if you know the movie Schindler's List, but Steven Spielberg produced the movie Schindler's List. And after he created that movie, he realized that the Holocaust survivors were getting old and most of them were going to die off eventually and their stories would be lost. So he helped found the Shoah Foundation, which recorded the stories of the survivors. And my mother's story was recorded. Now these recordings are called testimonies, and her testimony runs 3 hours. Obviously, we're not going to sit here and listen for 3 hours. So the museum invited me to be involved in a program where we would edit her story, and I was part of a group of 6 other people that were editing their family stories to create this presentation. Now, in order to do that, you're going to be listening to video clips of my mother speaking. Because I took these clips out of the entire presentation, sometimes she's cut off in mid-sentence. That's the result of the editing. Sometimes she's referring to something that you haven't heard. Also because I didn't think that was pertinent and I didn't want to put everything into this presentation. What else do you need to know? And I also put in archival photos that are available on the line and some personal photos of hers to give you more of a background into the whole history of where she was coming from and what her story was. So let me start share screen and I think we can get going. Okay, oh, here we go. Okay. This is my mother at that time, the time of her story. So kind of keep this image in mind, because obviously when you hear her speaking, she's a much older woman. Her story, when she begins to tell it, she's telling a story that's happening starting probably when she's about 16 years old, 16, 17, and this is her at that time. Oh, you know what? I should get my script. Jeremy, give me my folder from the laptop so I don't forget something. Yeah. Thank you. Okay. Her name was Paula. She grew up in a city called Munkach. This is an image of Munkach at the time. Munkach had the largest population of Jews in Southeastern Europe. And Paula grew up expecting to live, she's an ordinary girl, expecting to live a very ordinary life, growing up in a family, in a situation surrounded by family and friends, and growing up to just be married and have children, the same kind of life all of us is sort of anticipating that someday we'll have. And this is a city that she was born in. This is Munkach, and Munkach was at the time in Czechoslovakia. Czechoslovakia was a very good place to be because the Jews in Czechoslovakia lived really well. They were assimilated into Czech culture. They had relative religious freedom. They were educated. They were culturally sophisticated. They knew all about Western culture. They knew American movies, American books. And the Jews, as I said, were integrated into Czech society. Paula was the middle of 5 children. She had 2 older brothers and 2 younger brothers. Her mother was a homemaker, and her dad had a livery business, which is the equivalent of having a taxi. Only in those days, obviously, it was horses.
Kacheva was a very nice town. We had a very nice life. In Czechoslovakia, the Jews lived very well. Holidays were beautiful with family around. My mother made a beautiful table. It was joyful. It was very nice. The holidays were beautiful.
Do you remember some of the food that could be found at the table?
Goose and turkey and chickens and cakes and everything. Beautiful. My mother had beautiful things. And when she made a holiday table, it was very beautiful.
Can you describe your house for us?
It was a very nice house. And we had a kitchen, which was a living room and a kitchen. Everything was done in the kitchen. It was divided. We had a big table, and around everybody did their homework around the table, and discussions, and friends came and neighbors came. My favorite spot was between 2 windows. I had a chaise, and that's where I liked to lay and read. And outside the window, I had a lilac tree. So it was a porch going along the house. In the yard, we had beautiful flowers, beautiful roses.
Cooking?
The only thing I was asked to do is iron my white blouse to assembly. Every Thursday in school, we had assembly, and that was my job, to iron the blouse. And then when I was older, we had this, going up on the steps, we had these railings, and it had brass knobs and a brass handle on the door. And when I was older, that was my job. Every Friday afternoon, I had to polish that. And every Friday afternoon, I threatened to kill my brothers if they will touch it.
Where did you shop for food?
There was a market in Mukachevo twice a week. They came in, the peasant people, they came in, the farmers came into town twice a week with all fresh produce and everything. And besides of that, there was every day when my father came home for dinner, noontime, he brought home fresh bread, and he used to know all these farmers. So when the farmers came into town, he used to send them to my mother with pickles, with cucumber, with all vegetables, everything. So they can pickle it and put it in jars, save it for the winter. And outside of that, we had a man who owned a grocery store who came every Thursday morning to take my mother's order. Wow, the things were good. Took my mother's order and delivered it. So my mother never went to a grocery store or out to the market. Never, never. The only time my mother left the house, if she had somewhere to go with her white gloves and hats, that's the only way she went out of the house.
When things began to get bad, how did you obtain food?
The same way, those farmers knew my father, and in the end, it was very bad. We had very little food, and we knew somebody who owned a mill, and he used to supply a little flour, something, potatoes. We practically had very little food, but before they took us into about 1943, in the end of 43, we started to get very bad with food.
What kind of school did you go to?
I had public school, I had junior high, I had 4 years of high school, and 2 years of college, business college.
What did you study?
And in the college, I studied stenography, typing, bookkeeping, and I didn't graduate. I had 2 years. I didn't graduate because they wouldn't allow us to, back to school anymore.
Before it got bad and you were in school, what were your dreams? What were your hopes for your future?
Well, of course, I wanted to finish college, and then I will go to a big city, and I didn't want to stay in Mukachev, never. Every girl dreams of getting married and leave the town you were born. It's never happened, but I was dreaming.
Here she is. That's Paula with her mother in the middle and her brother that's just about a year older than her. So you can see that she had a very warm and loving family. And here she is, ready to go on her big career and going into the big city. Now, world map. Obviously, the white dot over there is New York, so you can sort of get your bearings. And on the other side is Europe. And let's zero in on what area we're talking about. You can see there on the map where Munkach is. Now, on this map, it says Munkach, and I'll explain why she's calling it Munkacheva. But you can see what's written in as Czechoslovakia, which is now divided into two parts with the Czech Republic and Slovakia. Munkach had been part of the vast Austro-Hungarian Empire. You see Austria, you see Hungary. It incorporated Austria, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Munkach, that whole part of Ukraine, part of Romania. But since World War I, the borders were changed and the country of Czechoslovakia was created, and Munkach was part of that country. Now, that city of Munkach is in Ukraine. The borders in Europe, it's something hard for all of us Americans to understand, but the borders in Europe keep changing. They're very fluid, which means that there are people that identify themselves as one culture or one nationality, and they're really living in a different territory with a different supposed legal system and national country. And that is part of the issue in places because the language changes along with the politics. But in 1938, in a failed attempt to appease German aggression, Germany was given the Sudetenland, which is Czechoslovakia, or parts of Czechoslovakia. And Hungary at that time allied itself with Germany. They thought Germany was stronger. They were going to be the winners of any possible aggression. And as a result, Germany gave Hungary parts of Czechoslovakia, and the part that Hungary was given was where Munkach was, an area that's now Ukraine. As I said, it gets very confusing. So in 1939, Hungary officially annexes Munkach. When it does that, conditions become very harsh. Jews no longer have the freedoms that they had. Policies increase in severity. And most Hungarian Jews, though, they kind of knew what was going on in Germany, but they were Hungarian Jews. They didn't see themselves as German Jews. They were hearing about the atrocities happening in Germany, but they felt, well, they're Hungarian, they're safe. And actually, my mom's dad, because before World War I, it was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So my mom's dad served in the Hungarian army. So when Hungary took over and the Hungarian soldiers were marching in, he thought the Hungarians were liberating them. Things were really going to be good until he went up to greet the Hungarian soldiers coming into town, and they just knocked him down with the butt of their rifle. And here is Mom describing that.
See, soldiers, 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 and all the loudspeakers yelling that we should stay in the houses and we should be happy that the Hungarians came to liberate us and everything will remain the same. Propaganda. Nothing was the same.
What was everyone saying? Your family?
My mother was a Hungarian lady, And she lived in Czechoslovakia for 20 years, never learned a word of Czech. She was Hungarian. So she hoped, and my father had all these friends from the army from before the war, first war, and he was hoping that it's going to be the same. You know, he's going to meet his Hungarian buddies. No. Nobody believed that something like what happens in Germany will happen to us, because my father claimed that he was such a good Hungarian that nothing will ever happen to him. Nothing. And he did. He found out that things happened to him.
This is the Hungarian soldiers marching into town. Conditions continued to deteriorate of the Hungarians. Jewish children at any age were no longer allowed to attend school. There were curfews. Jews were not allowed out in the street past a certain past a certain time. They were no longer allowed to assemble in any kind of gathering. They were not allowed to attend public places. That meant Jews could no longer go to movies or theater, or kids were not allowed to go ice skating with other children that were on they didn't have skating rinks on the frozen ponds. No, Jewish children were not allowed to go skating with everyone else. They were not allowed to go to the library. Signs sprouted up all over. Jews not welcome here. It became illegal for Jews to shop in stores owned by non-Jews. It also became illegal for non-Jews to shop in stores that were owned by Jews. So things were getting more and more restrictive and more difficult. Jews could be stopped in the street for any reason and beaten up. If there was some dirt on the street, a Jewish woman, if she was out in the street, could be stopped and made to start scrubbing the sidewalk. If a Jewish man was found on the street and he had a beard, he could be stopped and they'd start cutting off his beard right there in public in the street. And then what was probably the worst part of it, young men in their teens, in their early 20s, were taken away as slave labor. They needed the Hungarian, the war machines needed workers to dig ditches, to dig latrines, to do all kinds of work. And the best kind of labor they could get was the free labor by just taking these men, young men, off the street, making them slave labor. Even in a way, worse than slaves, because they didn't care what happened to them. They didn't care about feeding them or clothing them or how cold it was or what their sleeping conditions were, because if they died, they died. There were always more that they could just take off the street. Paula's two older brothers were taken away as slave labor that way. But as time went on, Germany began, remember this was going on for several years. It progressed gradually. And as time went on, Germany was beginning to lose battles and it began to experience defeat. And when that happened, Hungary said, I don't think we should be Germany's allies. Let's distance ourselves from Germany for a bit. But that was not to be allowed. In March of 1944, which was 5 years after the Hungarian annexation of Munkacs, the Germans invaded Hungary. And one of the first things that happened is the Jews of Hungary were sent into a ghetto, into a very small neighborhood that became what was designated as a ghetto. And this is an image of some of the slave labor, how they were in the middle of the winter, just standing there waiting to be told what to do to dig ditches. Look, some of them are just wearing, look at their shoes covered with snow. Look at how cold they are. But Mom describes the ghetto, more of the slave labor. Here is an image of the ghetto. It's a poor part of town, and there are signs there only for Jews. They're not allowed to leave. And you can see what it's like in the ghetto.
In beginning of 1944, the Jews couldn't stay in the nice homes they occupied because the Hungarians created a ghetto.
How did you hear this?
How did we hear it? we had posters. They came to the house and they told us you have to leave your homes and we will send you to a place designated for you. And they took all the Jews from these beautiful homes and they pushed them into these little holes. I don't know how many families to a room designated. One little side street, the worst neighborhood. And that's where we stayed. We stayed for 4 weeks there. And after 4 weeks, they came and chased us out of there. We have to leave.
There are German soldiers coming into the ghetto who chase the people out of the ghetto. In May of 1944, trucks arrived, German soldiers, dogs, giving people with whips and whatever, and whistles and yelling, okay, everybody out. I can't say it in German. They had 15 minutes to gather all of their belongings, whatever they could carry with them, and had to be out on the street and walking more than 2 miles across town to the brick factory. Every town in that area had a brick factory near the railroad station. It was an area where the clay was very conducive to building bricks. And obviously, if you wanted to load the bricks and transport them somewhere, you built the brick factory near the railroad station.
Jacobs in the ghetto?
Yes. So we had to leave. Now we have to leave the ghetto. And we had to walk to the other end of outside of town to the brick factory. But while walking, we had to pass all these homes we left. And we saw all these peasants and all these Hungarian people who took and stole all our things and looking out the windows and clapping and be happy. Oh, this is what we lived for. We see the Jews leave, the crooks, the robbers. They called us names and they throw stones at us. But our neighbors, the Hungarians who lived there from before, they all stood behind the windows. You can see them crying that we are leaving. But the people who occupied our homes, they were happy to see us leave. So we arrived to the brick factory, and everybody had to make themselves a little nook on the floor in the dirt and the red dust from the bricks. We spent there a whole week laying on the floor in the dirt.
How many people were there?
A lot of people, but I only know about, something, all these years, you try to put all these things out of your mind. There is some things were so horrible that I don't want to know, I don't want to remember. But that we lived there in this squalor on the floors for a week, unwashed, unkept, and dirty. Because by the time we arrived to Auschwitz, we all looked like animals.
When you first got to the brick factory, everybody was walking?
Oh, sure. And who couldn't walk stayed behind. I don't know what happened to them.
How long did it take to get to the brick factory?
Oh, so from one end of town to the other end for hours. We walked a long time.
Who was with you?
My parents, my 2 younger brothers. Larry and Mark was already in forced labor camp, but the 2 little ones were with us.
Did you discuss anything? Did you talk as you walked? Did you have questions?
No, nobody had questions. Nobody knew anything. My parents just told us everything will be okay. You'll see. We'll go to a new place. We will start making a new life for ourselves. Don't worry, don't worry.
Kind of what the brick factory looked like. We think of factories, these big buildings. It's just this. It's like big sheds with all the brick dust all over the ground. And these are the Jews of Munkac walking to the brick factory, carrying their life, all their world behind them. Within a week, more than 26,000 inhabitants of Munkac, 26,000 inhabitants of Munkach were sent to Auschwitz, Auschwitz-Birkenau concentration camp. And most of them were killed upon arrival. Here they are lined up waiting for the train to take them to the brick factory. And they were loaded onto boxcars that were usually used to transport cattle. They were packed on this boxcar so densely that if someone passed out or if someone died, they couldn't even fall over because there were too many people holding them up. There was a bucket in one corner for water, and there was a bucket in the opposite corner of the boxcar for people to relieve themselves. There was no ventilation, there were no windows, there was no food, and this is the way they were transported to Auschwitz. It took 3 days to get there. And at that point, on May 30th, well, not about arriving to Auschwitz, but on May 30th, 1944, the authorities proclaimed the fair city of Munkach finally free of all Jews. 450,000, again, 450,000 Hungarian Jews, many from Munkach, were murdered between 1944 and 1945. This is the arrival to Auschwitz concentration camp. There is a big sign over the door, and it says, Arbeit macht frei. It means work will set you free. All right, I don't know what the other photo was from, out of place. These are people coming off of the boxcars arriving at Auschwitz. You can see families, old people, young people, children. When they arrive in Auschwitz, they are lined up, and there are Nazi officers reviewing them. There's always a Nazi officer at every arrival. And they look at the people and they take the ones, if they thought someone was too young to be of use, or too old to be of use, or too frail, or anything wrong with them, they would send them that way. That was directly to the gas chambers. The rest of them were divided into men's groups and women's group and sent on to the barracks. Among those doing the reviews, these are Nazi officers doing the reviews. The one in the middle, the good-looking one, was very educated, very well known, very well respected. He was a doctor. His name was Dr. Mengele. Mengele earned himself the title of the Angel of Death. What he was looking for when he was there at the reviews, when people arrived in Auschwitz, his specialty was looking for identical twins, so he could perform experiments on the twins and use one as a control for his experiment. He had less regard for the victims of his experiments than we have for the lab mice when we do experiments. And here Paula describes her arrival at Auschwitz.
The doors open and some soldiers with guns and Nazis and dogs, and they started screaming, "Raus, raus, raus, out, out." And there was, everybody is panicking, you don't know what, and there's an old rabbi, and the rabbi says in Jewish, can I say it, what he said in Jewish? Kinderlich zogt wieder, wieder. So I asked my father, what is he saying? He says, this is the last prayer before you die. And the dogs are barking and screaming, and the children are screaming. And Rouse, you had to jump out of the cattle car. We lined up after pushing, shoving, dirty, smelly. We looked horrible, you know, after 3 weeks, 3 days. My mother is with me, and we go online. And we came to a man, which we find out later was Mengele. And he says to my mother, you go here and you go here. And my mother says to him, and everybody was after, when I talked to people, we met later on. They said, you were the only ones he spoke to. And he spoke Hungarian. And my mother says to him, please let me go with my sister. I'm a peasant girl. I am strong and I can work hard. So he thought a little bit and he said, okay, go, we'll find you, he said. We will find you. My father and my children, the two little brothers, went that away. It's the last time I saw them. We came. They took us into a room. They shaved our hair. They took away our clothes. They gave us some rags to put on. And my mother is sitting next to me and she's screaming. She had a little name for me, my little name of endearment, Pirike. They used to call me the little one. And she didn't recognize me. All right, so we are still together. We go, they take us into the camp. Excuse me.
Can you describe what you saw when you first entered the camp?
It was night time. I think it was night. A lot of people, a lot of men, a lot of women, shaven head. I didn't recognize anybody. I didn't know what. And they took us into our barracks, already lined up. And the door had window panes. And as I walked by, I see a face like a moon, stupid-looking thing. I says, oh, my God, who's that stupid-looking face? And I find out it was me. Head shaven, scary eye, big eyes, scared, hungry, a rag, you know. They gave me some kind of a black rag. That's what I wore. So we go in.
You could see the women with the shaved heads. And this particular camp that you're seeing, we're here, the women are given uniforms. That's why they're all dressed the same. But what Paula is describing is whatever discarded clothes from other people, they were just assigned, they were just given some rags to wear. But you do see the shaved heads. Survival in Auschwitz obviously was extremely difficult. Prisoners lived in wooden barracks, multiple people to what was called a bunk, which was just a wooden platform. These are images of what the bunks were like. They slept crowded. Twice a day, they were lined up outside at what was called an appel, appel being the French word for name. So they were being counted. They were called out at the appel. Frequently, at these appels, these daily appels, prisoners were selected. Selection could mean that you were selected and being sent directly to a gas chamber, or selection could mean that they were being sent to other labor camps for work. Remember, the German war machine needed a lot of labor to make bombs, labor to make weapons, labor to make uniforms for the soldiers. So they were using all of these prisoners to do these things. There was no moving around in the barracks. They were too weak to move around anyway, but they were not allowed to be milling around or moving around, and there was nothing to do except lying on these platforms, so that if there was any kind of a job they could get, they were eager to do something, especially if they got a job, let's say, working in the kitchen. Well, if they got a job working in the kitchen, they might be able to smuggle out a potato or a carrot of the stuff they were working on. And maybe they could trade that with someone else who had a job going through the clothing that had been discarded by the prisoners when they arrived, because maybe they could find a piece of fabric that a woman could use as a scarf to wrap her head, to cover the shaved head. Rations were a very thin soup in the morning and a loaf of bread shared by several prisoners in the afternoon. And as I have said, many of them were looking for jobs. And here, oh yes, and among those Who's keeping order in all of these camps? Who's keeping order in all the barracks to keep fights from breaking out? So there are people in charge. I guess in the army, that would be the sergeant in a particular barracks. Here, these people in charge are called capos. The capos were fellow prisoners. Very often the capos were maybe political prisoners. They were prisoners that had a few more privileges, but very often the capos were worse than the actual prisoners because they had to keep proving themselves to keep their position of so-called privilege.
These capos like to wear these tags on their arms for which camp they are from, what number of their camp. And somebody suggested that my mother should embroider some of these things. And I made beautiful lettering. I told you I wanted to be an art teacher. I made beautiful lettering, and we pulled thread out of our military. Every bed had a blanket for 4 people. And we pulled thread out of the blankets, and my mother embroidered these signs for them, and that's what we get, some extra rations. The girls in my line, on my bunk, trusted me to divide the bread. I don't know why they trusted me, but they did. I had a string. I pulled a piece of string from the blanket again, and I made 4 knots on the string, divided all the bread divided equally. So that's what my job.
The sample of an armband. At some point, Mom antagonizes a soldier that approaches her, and she'll describe that. As a punishment, he has her moved away. Remember, right now, she's with her mother and probably other people from her hometown. She's with people she knows. And now she's being moved to a different part of the camp. And the part of the camp she's moved to is, she'll describe the people in that camp as gypsies. That was the term that was used then. Now they are the Romacenti. That's the politically correct term now, but at the time, my mother calls them gypsies.
And I washed the pots after the soup, so we survived. And it was still October, and then one day something happened to me. There was a young Nazi, young, just a little nothing guard. He had no say in nothing. He knew that I was there with my mother. And one day I'm coming in from outside, and somebody caught me by my breast, and I thought it's one of the Polish workers. So I turned around and I hit him. And he says to me, "Ich sag dir, du wirst gehen ein Appeal ohne deine Mutter. You will leave here without your mother." That's what he told me. And he did. There were some girls who sold themselves to these workers for whatever they can get. And I looked, some of the girls have these beautiful kerchiefs on their head because, you were embarrassed, shaven head. Some of them had these beautiful kerchiefs. And one of these Polish guys approached me, and somebody pulled my hand, and I looked, it was a gypsy woman, and says to me, "If you don't go with him, I promise you I'll bring you a beautiful scarf tomorrow." I don't know, I must have looked very young or scared or stupid looking, whatever. And she did. A few years later, I was married to my husband, and we owned a shoe business. And a group of gypsies came into the store. And a woman came to me, and she says to me, "Do you remember the gypsy woman who gave you a scarf in Auschwitz?" I says, "Yeah, how did you know?" She says, "Because it was me." Imagine.
Okay, late in September, It was 1944. Remember, she's been wearing this ragged black dress. She's given a dress, a decent looking dress and a coat, and she's sent to a labor camp on a farm in Germany. There's 600 other prisoners that go with her. And at some point they're divided up. She is part of the 300 that are sent to this particular farm. And this farm is being supervised by the Wehrmacht. The Wehrmacht is the regular German army, which is a very important difference from the other 300 that were being sent to a camp that was under control of the Gestapo or the SS. The Wehrmacht treated the prisoners in this camp the way their own soldiers were being treated. They had the same kind of shelter and they ate the same kind of food. So she had a slightly better condition, and she was there until January of 1944. But by January of 1944, Germany is seriously facing defeat. And as the Allied forces are moving from France in going east into Germany, and the Russian forces are coming west into Germany, the Nazis are trying to condense all of their concentration camps, and they are trying to bring all of the prisoners, rather than just surrendering them and leaving them alone, they're trying to bring all of their prisoners into Russia. So into Germany. So what winds up happening is these prisoners, who are in terrible shape to begin with, in January, they are being moved into Germany, deeper into Germany, on what is called a death march. Here they are. I mean, this is obviously the men from one camp. And here she describes.
We walked, and we walked for 6 weeks. 6 weeks.
Where would you sleep?
We slept in barns, and we slept on the road. We slept on the, every time I drive by woods, we used to go up to the Catskill Mountains, and every time we drove by these woods, the mountains, I always remember how they stopped us on the edge of the woods, and we spent the night there, and in the morning we start walking again. I don't know how I survived. I don't know how I didn't freeze to death, because I had a beautiful coat, but I had no shoes. I had wooden clogs, and my feet didn't freeze.
What time of year?
Winter, from January, in January. And we walked all through whole of Germany. We walked for 6 weeks. All these villages, we didn't see a man anywhere, only old women and children, because they were all in the war. Some of the old women, when they saw us, they cried, and they whatever they had, they fed us. They used to bring us these beets, the sugar beets, and they used to cook these sugar beets and water and give us something to eat. And every night, and every day. And then we were walking, and who couldn't walk stayed behind, and all we heard is shots. They couldn't walk. They took them to the woods. They shoot them. And we kept walking, and we arrived to Bergen-Belsen.
Bergen-Belsen concentration camp. Bergen-Belsen was a complex of camps. This is Bergen-Belsen concentration camp. And as I said, it was a complex of camps, and Mom was moved to a section of the camp with the worst conditions. There were mountains, literally mountains of dead bodies, mountains of parts of bodies, because people were dying of disease and starvation so quickly, there wasn't even an opportunity to burn the bodies or do anything with the bodies. They were just left in mountains. And she was determined to get out, at least to get out of that section of the camp. Bread rations, old stale bread, was brought in every day. with a certain number of people from a different section of the camp bringing the rations in, and then that same group of people would leave. And she saw that this was a way that she could sneak her way out.
And by the gate, they counted how many people, how many girls came in. The same amount of girls have to go out. And I'm practically outside the door, and all of a sudden, I hear a girl screaming, "My Schwester, my Schwester!" Some people, two sisters came for bread, and one stayed behind because they counted how many people came. And at night, when I can't sleep, I still hear her screaming, "My Schwester, my Schwester."
The Bergen-Belsen sign tells you as much as you need to know. Anyway, she was caught. She was caught trying to sneak out. And the capo that caught her took her to a supervising capo. Now, remember what I had said before, there were a lot of languages. There were people from a lot of different nationalities in these camps. So they don't necessarily have a common language that they can communicate in. But this time, again, she gets a little lucky. The capo that she's brought to is Czech. So they can speak to each other. And she barters with this capo. As I said, the capo have privileges, but they're really not in a good spot either. I had said that Paula had her coat that she had gone to the previous camp with. She had a coat. And she had previously, when she got to Bergen-Belsen, bartered her coat in exchange for an onion, because at least an onion was something to eat. So she had that onion, she hadn't eaten it yet, and she negotiated with the capo. They became a little friendlier, and she said to the capo, you know, I'll give you the onion if you help me, if you don't send me to my death. And the capo said to her, if you can get me any more of this food, I'm responsible for sending people out to this small little work camp outside of here, and the conditions are better there. And as soon as there's a vacancy, meaning if someone dies there, I can get you sent there. So that was the deal that they struck. And she got lucky. She was sent on a truck to that other camp that was a very small camp, just a short distance away.
The truck arrives and girls came running from all over and started unloading the truck, and they saw me. They started calling my name. It turns out that everybody in that camp was from my hometown. Up till then, I was all alone. You know what a horrible thing that is, to be alone? And they recognized me, and right away they took me in and they fed me, and it was good. And it turns out that I contracted typhus fever in Bergen-Belsen, and I brought that with me to that little camp. But I was more sick than a little sick. And like I told you, everybody was from my hometown. The doctor turned out to be a girl who lived on my block where I was growing up. And she came middle of the night, nobody should see, and gave me a shot of something, I don't know what. And every day when the Nazis came to see who isn't able to walk, they took them back to Bergen-Belsen. And she had to go with them to walk around the hospital. If you couldn't sit up, they took you. So she used to stand, and I used to lean on her back, and this is how she made me this is how she thought that I'm sitting up, and that's how I survived.
Soon, this camp is also being evacuated. There were 28 women in the infirmary, and the camp is being evacuated and is going to be set on fire. But what do you do with the 28 women in the infirmary? Well, they were locked in, and they were going to die in the fire. That was the plan, the officers in the camp. But again, she got lucky. At the last minute, these women, and you can see the camp on fire. The last moment, the women are loaded onto a truck. Apparently, the senior officers in this little camp had already taken off. The war was ending. They were running away. But they were junior officers that were left there in charge to set the fire. And they realized that when the senior officers left, they left a lot of what they had confiscated from the general neighborhood that they were in. There were bottles of cases of champagne, of wine, and they were loading it onto the truck. They were stealing it, and they loaded these women, these sick prisoners, onto the truck as camouflage, so that if they were stopped, no one would know that they were really stealing all of this other stuff. So they took the truck out of the camp, stopped somewhere along the road, and let all the women out. And they're told, just find your own way. We'll come back for you later. But everyone knew they were not going to be found later. No one was coming back for them. But they were sick. They were in the infirmary. They were dying. What were they going to do? And there was no place for shelter. They were just left in January on the side of the road. Just an image of the kind of truck they were loaded onto. Anyway, they knew the war was coming to a close. The women eventually worked their way. They found their way to a farm, and they were allowed to hide in the barn in the farm, and they were farm workers. The workers were Russian soldiers that had run away from the war. There were miscellaneous people there that were former prisoners that had escaped in some way. And the workers on the farm told them that the war was coming to them. There would be bombings, there would be things going on, and that the workers, they found a shelter. They had a place to hide from the bombing, but they weren't going to tell these women where it was because they didn't trust them. They didn't want to lose their hiding spot, but they said, if you hear bombs falling, if you hear soldiers coming, if you see us running, follow us and we'll let you into our shelter.
They wouldn't tell nobody where it is. But when the fighting will come closer and there will be street fighting and we will see them running, we should run after them. They will hide us there. Suddenly we hear shooting and screaming and yelling and running and tanks and military and soldiers are walking. And everybody is running. So we started running after them. And all of a sudden something hit my leg and I fell in a ditch, and that's all I know. I came to that one of the Russian, which I never saw him before, he looked down in the ditch and he says to me, the Anglicanes, the English are giving out candies and you sleeping? And he went down to the ditch and picked me up like that and carried me in the middle of the farm. And the English soldiers were standing around there, and they had a big, tremendous big crate, almost as big as that table. And that man, as he was carrying me, he put me down on the top of that crate. It turned out that crate was full of candies. The English were giving around. And something hit me. I still have the wound here. It was a piece of a shrapnel hit my leg, a piece of a bullet or a shrapnel or something. And we survived. Then they took us, one girl, they were all running. And when they ran and they went down on the ditch, a girl stayed on top. And her sister says to her, get down, get down. She says, how can I get down if the tank is coming towards me? And she got so frightened that she lost her mind right then. And it was the English tank already coming. Well, anyway, what we did there, what we went through after, it's okay. But then they took us to the hospitals. I was there till July in the hospital. Oh, one very important picture.
A very important picture. These are the young women she was with. That's her second, I don't know, left or right based on the way you're looking at the screen. She's wearing a white blouse. Second from the end. And These are the ones that she survived with that were in the hospital with her. Behind them are, I think is a matron of the hospital they were in and some of the British soldiers. The British, I'll put a quick anecdote in this because she doesn't mention it. The British soldiers were able to go home when they were on leave and then come back to the hospital. And some of them, when they went home and told their mothers what had been happening and what they were doing and how they were protecting these women in the hospitals, the mothers sent things like clothes. What these women are wearing are things that were sent by the mothers of the British soldiers. A comb to comb hair, maybe a lipstick, which they hadn't seen in I don't know how many years. She had a shrapnel wound in her leg. She spent 3 months in a hospital recuperating. The war ended in May of 1945, and most survivors returned home to see who else had survived. Remember, there are no cell phones. How do you know who survived? You put up little signs in any place you think anyone else can look at. You register with the Red Cross. But eventually, after a month or so, everyone who can come home came home. And since she hadn't come home, whoever had survived assumed she was dead. But when she was ready to come home, she did meet someone from her hometown who said, you know what? Your mother thinks you're dead. Your mother survived. I'm going on ahead and I'm going to tell your family that you're alive so that your mother won't die of shock. And slowly she works her way home. She still has her wound. She's walking with a cane. Her hair had to be shaved again because of the typhus, it didn't grow back well. So she has no hair. She's walking with a cane. 9 months had passed since the last time she saw her mother. Mom at this time was 22. Her mother was 45. Okay, please play.
You were shot, you were wounded, but you are alive. Saturday morning, I arrived to my hometown. And all of a sudden I see my 2 brothers waiting for me. And they came, they had no way to get me. They came with a wheelbarrow to push me. My brother says, oh, here goes Mama. And I see this rag lady, this bag lady, this woman, this operation, this dirt, this filth, this a rag bag, walking towards me. And she comes up to my face to realize that that's my mother without one tooth in her head. And I looked at her, and I saw in her eyes the way I looked. Because I looked the same way. I just wanted to add, like I said, I never saw my father again, my 2 brothers. But after the war, I met some people who was with my youngest brother. They claimed that he wasn't selected for the gas chamber. He survived, both of them. And somebody saw Joseph the day of the liberation crying because he was so skinny and he was starving. He starved to death. The day of the liberation, they saw him. I don't know where he was buried, what happened to him. The little one, somebody said that he became a valet to one of the leaders, one of the Nazis, Eugene. And they also had to march to Bergen-Belsen. And one night, that the Nazi leader disappeared with the child. I don't know what happened, where he is. Maybe he's somewhere, maybe he exists somewhere. We don't know. We don't know nothing.
What kept you going?
The will to survive, the will to live. I wanted to see my family. I don't know. We just kept going, day after day, day after day. You didn't think of nothing. You didn't think what's coming. You didn't know what will be or what happened. You just kept going. This is it. This is your life. You have to do this. This is it.
It was unsafe for her to stay in Munkach. Just because the war is over doesn't mean things are safe. A friend offered her a home and a job working for his brother Morris as a housekeeper. Now, on one end, you can see the edge of Czechoslovakia. You can see where Munkach was. She now has to travel. You see the red line. Now she has to get all the way over to this other city in Czechoslovakia. Remember, she has no money. She has no passport. She has nothing except the clothes on her back. But she's got to make her way there because the Russians are slowly taking over where she was living, and it was unsafe for a young woman to be there. So she is sent to Morris, and he has a small shoe manufacturing business in Czechoslovakia. He provided room and board to his employees, so he needed a housekeeper to take care of his home. She was grateful for the opportunity. And Morris had been in forced labor. He had been captured. He spent years in a prison camp in Siberia. He was 16 years older, and he had been married before the war. It was his 9-year-old son and 12-year-old daughter that I referred to before when I said I lost a brother and a sister. He was also a Holocaust survivor. That's Morris. These are the images of the POW camp in Siberia. Eventually they married, and I was born. They started to build a life together. Life was good after what they had been through. Life was good. They lived above the store. I was born. They looked forward to a good future. Unfortunately, communism was growing, and communism was a growing threat. They were afraid to stay where they were. So we had to leave Czechoslovakia. This is a passport picture of me and my mom. We had to go, we had to flee the communist threat in Czechoslovakia and emigrate to Israel.
In Israel, we were refugees. Everybody was refugee in Israel. And we lived in a tent. And my daughter had the measles, and they said to us that you have to take her out of here if you want this child to survive. So we took her out. There wasn't a nice home. We created a home from a garage. Under a 6-family house, we rented the garage and fixed it up as a home.
When she says we lived in a tent, we lived in a tent for 6 months. Now you can ask why we didn't come to the United States. Well, the United States, as we know, because it's all in the news now for a whole variety of reasons, there were quota lists. We couldn't get on the quota. Even though there was family in the United States, we still did not make the quota to come to the US, so Israel was the alternative. Eventually, obviously, we came to the US. Next passport picture, coming to the United States.
And I said to myself, like this tape, how can you put your life in a tape? It's a movie, it's a story. But what you go through day to day, day by day, hour after hour, that's not stories. Every minute of the day you were in danger, because every minute of the day you thought, this is the last minute of your life. And you go to the next minute, and to the next minute, and somehow you survive. I just don't know how I sit and talk like it happened to somebody else, not to me. It's like I'm watching myself from the outside. You understand what I mean? I can't express myself. It's like it wasn't me I talk about. But it was me. And I still hear the girl screaming, my Schwester, my Schwester. now I see that if something happened, or like somebody was attacked or something happened to school, the children right away have psychiatrists talking to them. Nobody cared if we are still normal people. I always say I'm not a normal person, because if a normal person couldn't go through what I went through, what I saw daily on a daily basis. But somehow I'm here and talk about it. And for so many years you blocked it out, you don't want to talk about it. Then suddenly everybody says it's important to talk about it. It's very important, because all those people who says it didn't happen. So you have to prove that it did happen. And you have to make sure that it doesn't happen again, because it's happening again all over the world. They didn't only take Jews, they took everybody who was against them. I just want to say to be good to each other and love each other and try and make sure this never happens again. Because when people are mean, that's when it happens, you know? Just try to understand each other. That's what I want to say. That's all.
The Holocaust didn't start with Hitler's final solution or with the death camps. It started with words. It started with derogatory cartoons in the newspaper in different places. Anti-Semitism and all kinds of hate. It's a virus. It's a virus that's more contagious than COVID. And it spreads just as rapidly. And it grows when good people stay silent. When they stay silent against the hatred and abuse that they see around them. History is a very harsh teacher. It's why I do this presentation. We have to learn that history, and may we all learn its lessons and not stay silent and just stand by. That's it. Thank you all for listening.